The night pressed heavy over the endless prairie, the kind of night where even the stars seemed too frightened to show their faces. A chill wind moved through the trees at the edge of the forest, whispering like 1,000 voices, too faint to understand. Emily Carter stumbled forward every step, a battle, every breath, sharp and burning. Her dress, once pale blue, now clung to her skin with mud and dried blood. Her hair, tangled and damp, stuck to her cheeks. She had been running for hours, maybe longer. Time had lost its meaning somewhere between the blows of Jack Malone's fists and the cruel laughter that followed. She had thought she could escape him for good this time, that leaving behind everything she once knew would finally set her free. But Jack was like a shadow stitched to her soul. He followed no matter how far she ran. Her lungs screamed for air. She pressed a hand to her ribs where the bruises throbbed like hot coals under her skin. Ahead, the forest swallowed the moonlight. She hesitated, glancing back at the open land behind her. Nothing stirred there, but she knew he was close. She could feel him the way prey feels the predator long before it sees teeth. Branches snapped somewhere in the darkness, and her body froze. She pressed herself against a tree, the bark cutting into her bare arms. She tried to steady her breathing, but it came out in shallow gasps. Jack's voice slithered through the night. "Emily!" It was almost gentle, but the kind of gentle that carried knives behind its back. "You know you can't hide. You know I'll always find you." Her heart hammered, every beat an explosion of terror. She closed her eyes, praying for silence, praying for a miracle. But miracles were scarce out here on the edge of nowhere. A twig cracked closer this time. She pushed herself off the tree and bolted deeper into the wood's branches, clawing at her arms, roots tearing at her ankles. She didn't look back. Looking back meant slowing down. The ground dropped suddenly, sending her tumbling down a slope into a clearing. Pain jolted through her knees as she landed hard on the dirt. She scrambled up her vision, swimming. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw light, maybe a lantern, but when she blinked, it was gone. A rustle behind her froze her blood. Then a hand clamped down on her wrist, yanking her backward. She screamed, thrashing, clawing at the darkness. Jack's face emerged from the shadows, his grin sharp, his eyes glimmering like a wolf's. "There you are," he whispered, pulling her close. The smell of whiskey and sweat clung to him. "Running makes it sweeter. You know that, don't you?" She kicked, struck, clawed, but he was stronger. His fist cracked against her cheek and the world spun. He shoved her against the tree ropes already in his hand, as if he had prepared this moment, planned it down to her last breath. She fought until her arms burned, until the ropes cut into her skin, binding her wrists high above her head. Her body trembled, not only from fear, but from the exhaustion that had been gnawing at her for days. Jack leaned close, his lips brushing her ear. "You belong to me. No one else. Not now, not ever." Tears blurred her vision, but behind them flickered something else, a fire that refused to die. She spat at him, the only defiance she had left. His grin widened. "Good. Fight me. I like it when you fight." He stepped back, admiring his work as if she were some twisted piece of art he had made. The rope around her wrist tightened with every tremble, every attempt to break free. Her feet barely touched the ground. The night stretched on like an endless trial. Jack circled her, muttering, laughing under his breath. Sometimes he would disappear into the shadows, only to return and remind her he was still there. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the man he used to be, the one who had charmed her with soft words, who had promised her the world. But that man had never truly existed. This was the real Jack Malone, and he was worse than any devil she had ever imagined. Time dissolved. Minutes felt like hours. She lost count of how many times she thought her strength would finally give out. Her arms screamed, her throat ached with every shallow breath. And then faintly there was something else. A sound. Boots, steady, deliberate. Not Jack's wild pacing, not his cruel dance. Someone else was there. Her heart leapt and then fell. What if it was another man like Jack, another predator drawn to her suffering? She forced her head up, blinking through tears. A figure stepped from the trees. Tall, broad, moving with the weight of years carried on his shoulders. The faint glow of dawn painted his weathered face, lined and scarred by a life of hard work and harder choices. He stopped when he saw her bound to the tree. His jaw tightened, eyes darkening with something she had not seen in a long time. Anger not for her, but for what had been done to her. "God Almighty," he muttered, his voice low, steady as stone. Who did this? Before she could answer, Jack's laugh echoed from the shadows. That'd be me, Dawson, he said, stepping forward, gun in hand. And she ain't yours to untie. The man, William Dawson, though she did not yet know his name, moved a hand slowly to the knife at his belt. His eyes never left Jack's. Then you've made yourself my problem, Dawson said, his voice calm, but there was iron beneath it. The clearing held its breath. The sun had not yet broken, but the first light of morning was coming creeping across the horizon. Emily hung between life and death, fear and hope, while two men faced each other under the ancient trees. One was the devil she had known, the other, a stranger who might be the only chance she had left. The forest seemed to draw closer around the three of them, as if the trees themselves leaned in to hear which man the morning would choose. Emily felt the rope burning deeper into her skin with each shiver. She tried to still herself to save what little strength she had left, but the tremble traveled from her wrist to her ribs and down to her legs. Jack noticed. He smiled the way a wolf smiles when the lamb starts to fold. Dawson did not look at her. He kept his gaze on Jack, a steady line that did not break even when a crow shrieked somewhere above them. His hand stayed near the knife at his belt, but he did not draw it yet. There was something slower in him, a habit of measuring the wind before it changed, a man who knew how long a spark would smolder before it caught. Jack raised his gun lazy at first, like a man stretching after a long nap. His voice drifted across the clearing. You think you can steal from me, old man? Dawson shifted one step to the side and another, bringing a thicker trunk between his chest and the barrel that watched him. His answer came flat. I do not steal. I return what never belonged to you. The smile on Jack's face thinned. The gun came up just enough to line with Dawson's ribs. Emily held her breath, and the rope creaked. She did not see Dawson move. One moment his hand rested near the knife. The next the blade flashed, quick as a fish in shallow water. He threw not at Jack, but at the low branch above Jack's shoulder. The blade struck wood with a hard clack, and Jack flinched just enough for Dawson to drop into a crouch and surge forward in the same breath. The shot tore the bark where Dawson's head had been. The crack bounced off the trees, echoed, died. Dawson hit the ground and rolled behind a stump that leaned like a broken tooth. Dirt puffed up around him. Jack cursed and fired again. Splinters spat from the stump. Emily twisted her wrists until hot needles ran through her hands. She kicked her heels against the air, trying to catch a root or a knot in the trunk, anything to push up against so the rope at her throat would not bite. The world turned thin, like all the light had been pressed into a tight strand that might snap. Dawson raised his head over the stump, only a thumb width, and fired once. The bullet took a hunk out of the tree by Jack's ear. Jack ducked and slid sideways, gun spitting fire, but Dawson had already moved. He came up on one knee near the edge of the clearing, patient, expressionless, and shot again. This time the round chewed dust at Jack's boots, forcing him back into the brush where the trees were thicker. The forest swallowed Jack for a breath. The clearing breathed out. Dawson did not wait. He sprinted for the trunk where Emily hung, his boots thudding hard and even. He slashed the rope at her wrist with a clean, controlled cut. The sudden weight of her body almost dropped them both, but he stepped under her and took the fall across his shoulder. The noose at her neck loosened. She coughed, lungs clawing for air that finally wanted to be hers. Easy now, he muttered, voice low and calm. Can you stand? She nodded, not trusting her voice. The world swam, steady, tilted. He slid her down, kept one arm around her waist until her knees remembered the ground. Jack came back like a storm, crashing through brush, snarling. He fired from the hip, and the bullet struck the trunk behind Emily's shoulder. Dawson did not answer with words. He aimed and squeezed smooth, as if he were still in the quiet morning before chores. His shot clipped Jack's hat and sent it spinning. Jack hissed and dropped behind a deadfall, reloading with fingers that had done this 100 times 1,000. Dawson leaned close to Emily. The horse is tied just beyond the birch, he said. Go to him. Take the reins. Talk soft. He knows my voice, but he will listen if yours is steady. I will be right behind you. Emily wanted to say she could not, that her legs shook, that fear had its hands still tight around her throat. But another shot ripped the bark to her left, and studied thought became a luxury she could not afford. She ran, stumbling once, catching herself with a hand that came away, brown with dirt. The birch stood pale like a bone in the dim light, and the gelding waited there, ears pricked, breath steaming. Hey boy, Emily whispered, her voice shredded but warm. Easy now. Easy. The horse flicked an ear toward her, stamped once, then lowered his head as if agreeing. She gathered the reins, surprised to find the leather solid in her grip, surprised to find that her hands could still hold anything at all. Behind her, the clearing cracked with more gunfire. Then the sound changed, became a thud of boots and a sharp grunt. Dawson broke free from cover and came at a run. When he reached her, she saw a fresh tear in his shirt at the side, a line of red soaking through. He noticed her eyes and shook his head once. "Bullet only kissed me," he said. "We have to go." He put her up first with a practiced lift like he had been catching riders as they fell his entire life. He swung up behind her and gathered the reins over her hands. The horse bunched, then surged forward, and the trees flowed past in streaks of green and gray. The first stretch of trail ran straight as a held breath, then broke into a weaving ribbon that dove between trunks and leapt over roots. The gelding knew the way. Dawson guided with knees and voice more than with leather. The wind pressed tears from Emily's eyes and plastered her hair to her temples. She looked back once and saw Jack burst into the trail, scrambling for a shot. The rage in him larger than his body. The distance grew. The trees helped hiding the fleeing pairs in quick slices of shadow. A shot cracked and tugged at the air near Emily's ear. She flinched and felt Dawson's chest tighten at her back. "Low," he said, and she folded, clutching the horn, making herself small. Another shot. The horse danced but kept his feet and flew on, breath-roaring foam flecking his bit. The trail dipped, rose, and suddenly opened to a long swath of grass that led toward a line of low hills washed in the first real light of morning. Dawson eased the gelding only enough to listen. No more gunfire. Only the distant, fading fury of a man denied. Even that sound thinned and then was gone. When they slowed at last, the world felt too quiet. Every beat of Emily's heart sounded loud enough to be heard a mile. She tried to swing a leg over and nearly slid to the ground. Dawson caught her with one arm and lowered her gently. He slipped down after, and for a moment he just stood there, one hand pressed to his side, watching the tree line as if the trees might change their minds. "We will rest only a moment," he said. "Then we move." She nodded. The trembling in her legs had turned into a slow, deep ache that reached the bone. She touched her throat and winced. The skin there pulsed with a tender heat, a ring of pain that would tell its own story for days. When she looked at Dawson, she saw the gray beneath his weathered skin and the wet shine where the fabric clung. "You should let me see," she said. The words came out rough. Later he answered, not unkind, "For now, water." He handed her a canteen. The taste hit like cold metal, then turned sweet as if she had forgotten what clean water felt like on her tongue. She drank, coughed, drank again, and handed it back. "Why did you stop?" she asked. "Why did you come into that forest?" Dawson looked past her toward the hills that would lead them home. His eyes softened like a man who has learned to hold his grief as carefully as he holds his hope. "Because some nights do not let a man sleep," he said. "I heard something carry on the wind, a sound a person makes when the world has done too much to them. I have heard it before. I will not hear it and keep walking if I can help it." She studied him, this stranger who had risked himself for her, with no promise that she was worth saving. Something warmed inside her, small but stubborn. "Jack will not stop," she said. "No," he agreed. "Men like that do not. They are storms that think they are gods, but storms break." He checked the horse, tightened the cinch, and gave the gelding a grateful pat. When he turned back, he swayed slightly. She reached out on instinct and steadied him. His surprise flickered and was gone, replaced by a quiet nod of thanks. He did not know how to make with words. "We go to my place," he said. "There is a shed where we can see to your wrists and my side. There are neighbors a few miles beyond. If he follows, we will not be alone." She thought of how alone she had been for so long that the word felt like her name. The idea of a place that could hold them even for an afternoon felt impossible and holy. "All right," she said. They mounted again, slower this time, and turned the gelding toward the low hills. The sun climbed gentle at first, then warmer, laying a thin gold across the grass. Birds woke. The day began as if nothing had happened in the trees behind them. But the forest kept its secrets poorly. A crow lifted from a pine and went winging toward the east as if it had a message to deliver to a man who did not need any more reason to be angry. Somewhere not so far that the earth would forget his tread. Jack Malone breathed through his teeth and tracked the faint scar of hoof prints where the dew had been parted. The land opened wider. A fence line appeared, weathered posts keeping a quiet order along the prairie. Beyond it, a squat ranch house held its ground against the wind. A lantern hung by the door unlit a promise for nightfall. Dawson's shoulders lowered a fraction when he saw it, the tension in his jaw loosening enough for a breath that did not hurt to leave him. Home, he said almost to himself. Emily looked at the house, at the corral, at the cottonwoods reaching up like green hands. She did not know if a place could ever feel safe again, but as the gelding carried them, the last yards she felt her fingers ease their grip, and the ache in her chest moved aside just enough to let a thin line of light in. They rode through the gate and the latch clicked behind them, with a sound so small it seemed it could not possibly matter. Yet it mattered to her in a way that made her throat tight. For the first time in a long time, there was a barrier, however humble, between her and the man who had sworn to own her. Dawson slid down and helped her to the ground. He nodded toward the door. Inside, he said, "We will clean you up and see what is left to mend, and then we will see what comes next." She followed him each step careful, each breath a decision. At the threshold, a faint crunch rose from the far side of the yard. A single stone turned under a boot. Emily froze. Dawson heard it too. His hand went to the revolver at his hip. The quiet of morning held. The wind paused. And the devil who believed the world belonged to him took another step closer. The crunch of gravel echoed through the yard again, slow and steady, as if each step was placed with the weight of intention. Emily's breath caught in her throat, and she pressed back against the wooden frame of the doorway. Dawson's hand lingered near the revolver at his hip, his eyes narrowing toward the sound. The morning light had grown stronger, spilling gold across the ranch yard, but it did little to soften the dread that crept between them. Birds that had been chirping a moment earlier went silent, as though they too knew what walked closer. Jack Malone stepped into view from the line of cottonwoods, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun. His hat was gone, his dark hair clinging damp to his forehead. A streak of dried blood traced his temple where Dawson's bullet had grazed him earlier. Instead of weakening him, the wound seemed to fuel his fury. His grin was thin, stretched like leather pulled too tight. "You thought you could take her from me, Dawson," Jack said, his voice low but carrying across the open yard. "But you should have known better. I don't lose what's mine." Emily felt her knees weaken, but she forced herself to stay upright, clutching the edge of the doorway for support. Her wrists still burned from the ropes, her throat ached from the noose, but something in her chest had shifted. The terror that once swallowed her whole was now a strange mix of fear and rage. Dawson stepped forward, planting his boots in the dirt. He didn't raise his revolver yet. His voice came calm, rough as gravel. "She's not yours, Malone. Never was." Jack tilted his head, studying Dawson as though he were nothing more than a stubborn mule standing between him and what he wanted. He lifted his pistol slowly, almost lazily, letting the morning light gleam off the steel. "Step aside, old man. I'll make it quick for you." "Can't say the same for her, though." Emily flinched, but Dawson didn't move. His stance stayed rooted, broad shoulders squared against the threat. He didn't blink. "If you want her," Dawson said, "you'll have to go through me." The yard stilled. The only sound was the faint creak of the windmill in the distance. Jack's grin widened. "Then so be it." The gunshot came sharp, splitting the air. Emily screamed, ducking down instinctively, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might tear from her chest. Dust kicked up inches from Dawson's boot, but Dawson had already drawn his revolver in one smooth practice motion. His shot rang out a heartbeat later, forcing Jack to dive behind a trough. Water splashed into the dirt, soaking the earth between them. Inside, Dawson barked his voice a command as he shoved Emily toward the doorway. She stumbled into the dim light of the ranch house, her hands trembling. She turned, watching Dawson retreat slowly, never taking his eyes off Jack. His revolver stayed raised steady despite the blood seeping through his shirt. Jack's laugh echoed from behind, cover twisted and sharp. "You're bleeding, Dawson. Every second you waste, you're closer to the ground. And when you fall, she's mine again." Emily's stomach twisted. She wanted to scream back, to hurl every word of hatred she'd swallowed for years, but fear held her tongue still. Instead, she grabbed the heavy iron lamp from the table, the same one that lit their suppers, the same one that now felt like the only weapon her hands could hold. Dawson eased backward into the doorway, his chest rising and falling hard. His eyes flicked to Emily, and for a second, softer than the storm outside, he said, "Stay behind me, no matter what." She nodded, gripping the lamp so tightly her knuckles turned white. Jack fired again, the bullet tearing into the frame of the house, wood splintering near Emily's shoulder. She ducked, a sharp cry slipping from her lips. Dawson fired back his shot, grazing across the trough and ricocheting into the dirt. The standoff dragged, each shot a question of who would fall first. Emily's ears rang with the thunder of gunfire, her chest aching with every breath. Then silence fell. No shots, no laughter, just the faint rustle of the cottonwoods. Dawson's brow furrowed. He knew Jack too well to believe he had retreated. And then, like a shadow uncoiling, Jack slipped along the side of the barn, moving low, his pistol ready. His voice came taunting. "You can't guard her forever, Dawson. I've already been inside her head. She'll come back to me. They always do." Emily's grip on the lamp tightened until her hands shook. Her fear boiled over into something rawer, sharper. Rage. She whispered to herself, so quiet only she could hear it. Never again. Jack was close now, his boots crunching against the gravel as he rounded the side. Dawson braced, revolver aimed steady at the corner. Emily stood just behind him, the lamp heavy in her arms, her heart pounding like a drum of war. And when Jack finally stepped into view, grinning like the devil come to collect his due, the world seemed to hold its breath. The world did not move when Jack rounded the corner. The morning air hung still, and even the horse in the corral stopped chewing. Ears pricked toward the yard. Jack's grin showed teeth, but his eyes burned darker than the shadow under his hat brim. His pistol gleamed, lifted, and aimed like an accusation. "Time's up, Dawson," he said. "Step aside and I'll let you breathe another hour." Maybe two. Dawson's revolver stayed steady, though his shoulder bled through the fabric of his shirt, the wound soaking deeper with every breath. His voice came low, carved from stone. "I'm not stepping aside, not for you, not ever." The standoff cracked open with another shot. Jack fired first, the bullet tearing into the doorframe inches from Dawson's head. Splinters showered the floor, where Emily crouched, her body pressed tight to the wall. The iron lamp clutched to her chest like a lifeline. Dawson fired back instantly. His round clipped Jack's sleeve, spinning him slightly, but not slowing his advance. Jack snarled, ducking low, firing twice more. One shot shattered a window. The other slammed into the table, sending crockery flying into shards. The house filled with smoke and the smell of burnt powder. Emily coughed, her eyes stinging. She crawled along the wall, staying low, moving closer to where Dawson stood, braced against the doorframe. His breathing was rough, shallow, but his aim never wavered. "He'll bleed you dry," Jack taunted, his voice slithering between shots. "He's half dead already, Emily. And when he drops, you'll be alone again. Just you and me, like it was meant to be." Emily froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. She remembered the first time Jack had spoken to her like that years ago, in tones sweet as honey but dripping with poison. She remembered believing him, then paying for it with every bruise, every scar. Her hands shook, but not with fear alone. Fury burned hot in her chest. Dawson glanced at her for the briefest second. His eyes, weathered and sharp, carried a message he didn't say aloud. "Hold fast. Choose your moment." Jack lunged forward, firing as he moved. Dawson's shot cracked back, and the bullet grazed Jack's side, drawing a curse but not slowing him. Jack slammed into the doorway, shoving with his shoulder, forcing his way inside. The room shrank. The fight was no longer distance and aim, but teeth and bone. Jack swung the butt of his pistol, cracking it against Dawson's injured shoulder. Dawson grunted, staggering, but managed to jam his forearm against Jack's chest, keeping the barrel of that pistol away from his heart. The two men grappled, their boots scraping the wooden floor, every move punctuated with a grunt or curse. The revolver clattered from Dawson's grip, sliding under the table. Jack shoved hard, driving him back toward the wall. "You're finished, old man," Jack spat, raising his pistol muzzle pressed against Dawson's ribs. Maybe Dawson rasped, but not today. His hand shot up, grabbing Jack's wrist, twisting it hard. The gun went off, the blast deafening inside the house, the bullet tearing into the ceiling. Jack snarled and drove a knee into Dawson's side, forcing him down to one knee. Emily stood frozen, the lamp heavy in her hands, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. Her mind screamed at her to move, to act, but her body shook under the weight of terror and memory. Then she saw Dawson's face creased with pain, blood trailing down his jaw, but his eyes never broke. They told her the same thing they had told her in the clearing. "Stand. Fight." Jack raised his pistol again, forcing Dawson's arm down with brute strength. "Say goodbye," he hissed, pressing the barrel to Dawson's chest. Emily screamed the sound raw and broken and swung the lamp. It crashed into the side of Jack's head with a crack of iron on bone. Jack staggered, dropping to one knee. Rage twisted his features as he turned toward her. She swung again harder, fueled by every night she had prayed for escape. The lamp smashed into his temple, sending him sprawling across the floor. Dawson scrambled, kicking the pistol from Jack's hand as it skittered across the planks. He reached for it, but his injured shoulder gave out and his hand slipped. Jack, dazed but not beaten, growled and tried to rise, blood running into his eye. Emily didn't let him. She swung the lamp once more, the iron denting with the force of the blow, knocking Jack flat. The house went still. Smoke hung in the air. Jack lay, sprawled, blood dark on his temple, his chest rising shallow but alive. Dawson panted, leaning against the wall. His revolver finally back in his grip, though his hand trembled. Emily stood over Jack, the lamp slick with his blood, her body quivering with shock and fury. She could finish it now, one more swing, and the nightmare would end forever. But her hands shook, caught between vengeance and the horror of what it would mean to cross that line. Dawson's voice broke the silence, low and heavy. "It's your choice, Emily. Yours alone." The sun had climbed higher now, spilling through the broken window, painting the scene in stark light. Jack groaned, his lips curling into a weak grin, despite the blood. "You can't kill me," he whispered. "You'll always be mine." Her knuckles tightened on the lamp. Her breath came in sharp gasps. And in that moment, she realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about ending the shadow that had followed her for years. The silence in the ranch house pressed harder than the gunfire had. Dust floated in the golden shafts of light streaming through the broken window, each mote hanging heavy as if waiting for her decision. Emily stood with the iron lamp raised her chest, heaving, her hands trembling from the force of what she had already done and what she had not yet chosen to do. Jack lay on the floor, his face streaked with blood. One eye swollen shut, his grin twisted even as it dripped with pain. He looked less like a man now and more like something that should never have been given flesh. "Go on," he hissed, his voice rasping like a snake sliding across dry leaves. "Swing it again? You think it'll set you free? You'll just see me every time you close your eyes. Kill me and I'll own you forever." Emily's grip faltered for a breath. The weight of the lamp grew heavier in her arms until her shoulders shook. She thought of all the nights she had prayed for the courage to end him, of every bruise, every scar he left behind. She thought of the rope cutting into her neck, of his laughter while she begged for air. And then she thought of Will Dawson, blood seeping through his shirt, his face drawn with pain, but his eyes steady on her. His voice came quiet, rough, as gravel dragged across stone. "Listen to me, Emily. He doesn't get to decide who you are anymore. Not with his words, not with his breath. This choice, it's not about him. It's about you." Her arms lowered a fraction, the lamp trembling at her side. Jack's grin widened despite the blood trickling from his temple. "That's it," he whispered. "You don't have it in you. You never did. You'll come back to me. They all come back." The fury inside her burned hotter than the fear. Her whole body trembled, not from weakness, but from the storm that had been gathering for years now breaking loose. She dropped the lamp with a heavy clang on the wooden floor, but not in surrender. She knelt low, her face inches from Jack's, her voice trembling but sharp. "I am not yours, not now, not ever. You don't get to live in my head anymore." She spat the words like venom, and for the first time she saw something shift in Jack's expression. Not triumph, not power, but doubt. His grin faltered. Dawson staggered closer, his revolver raised, though his arms shook. "Get away from him," he muttered. Emily rose slowly, her chest still heaving, but she stepped back toward Dawson, toward the one man who had faced Jack without fear. Jack tried to push himself up, but the effort drained him. His body crumpled back against the floor, his breath ragged. Dawson kept the gun-leveled eyes hard. "Law won't hold him," Dawson said flatly, his voice carrying years of bitter memory. "Men like him always slip through." Emily's stomach twisted. She knew Dawson was right. If Jack rose again, if he escaped, there would be no running far enough, no hiding deep enough. Her hand brushed against Dawson, steadying the revolver that trembled in his grasp. His eyes flicked to hers, searching. "If we do this," she whispered, "we end him together." For a long moment the air hung heavy, the weight of the choice pressing down like the sky itself. Jack's laugh, weak but sharp, cut through the silence. "You can't do it," he taunted. "You'll never." The gunshot thundered louder than all the ones before. Jack's words died in his throat. His body jerked, then went still. Smoke curled from the barrel, and the silence that followed was different than before. Cleaner, final. Emily stood frozen, her hands still pressed to Dawson's, both of them gripping the revolver. The world seemed to sway around her, the walls leaning in the floor, shifting under her feet. She wanted to collapse, to weep, to scream, but all that came was a deep, shuddering breath. "It's over," Dawson rasped, his voice hoarse. "No," Emily whispered, tears streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. "It's just beginning." She turned away from Jack's body, from the years of torment lying broken on the floor. The weight of it did not vanish, but for the first time it did not crush her. It rested differently, like a scar she could carry, instead of a wound that would never close. Dawson slumped against the wall, his face pale, his wound bleeding freely now that the fight was done. Emily rushed to him, pressing her hands to his side, desperate to slow the crimson that spread across his shirt. "Don't you dare leave me now," she said, her voice breaking. "You came this far. Stay with me." He gave her that crooked half-smile, even through the pain. "Takes more than one devil to send me under." She tied strips of cloth tight against his wound, her hands shaking but determined. Every knot was a prayer, every pull a promise. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and golden under the sun. The world looked the same, yet everything had changed. Emily and Dawson sat in the shadow of the ranch house, battered, bleeding, but alive. The devil was gone, and those shadows would always remain. The morning air tasted different now. Freer. But far on the horizon, a column of dust rose, where riders moved distant but growing closer. The world of the West was never kind enough to let peace linger long. The prairie did not stay silent for long. Emily noticed at first the faint haze on the horizon, a pillar of dust curling upward into the bright sky. At first she thought it was the wind stirring the land, but the movement was steady too deliberate. Her chest tightened as she realized what it meant. Riders. More than one. Maybe a dozen. Dawson saw it too. He leaned against the doorway, pale from blood loss but steady in his stance, his revolver still loose in his hand. His eyes narrowed on the dust cloud. "He wasn't alone," Dawson muttered. "Men like Jack never ride alone." Emily's stomach turned cold. She thought killing Jack would end the nightmare, but of course it wouldn't be that simple. Men like him always left shadows behind, men willing to carry his cruelty forward. "What do we do?" she whispered, clutching the bloody cloth pressed to Dawson's side. He looked at her, the lines of his face drawn hard with pain but calm as stone. "We hold as long as we can. I'll get you out if it comes to it." She shook her head fiercely, tears stinging her eyes. "No, not again. I'm not running anymore." Dawson studied her for a moment, the defiance in her eyes, the steel that hadn't been there when he first found her in the forest. A faint smile tugged at his lips despite the blood on them. "You've got more fight than most men I've known." The sound of hooves grew louder, the thunder of them rolling across the land. Emily's heart pounded in rhythm with their approach. She could make out shapes, now riders, black against the horizon, moving fast. Dawson limped toward the window, bracing his arm against the frame. "Check the rifles in the chest," he said, his voice sharp but not cruel. "Bottom of the trunk under the blankets." Emily ran to the corner, pulling open the heavy cedar chest. The smell of cedar and old wool filled her nose. Under the folded blankets lay two rifles, well kept. Their barrels oiled, their stocks polished with years of use. She lifted one, surprised by its weight, and brought it to Dawson. He took it with a nod, checking the chamber with practiced hands. "Good. You'll take the other." Her hands shook as she lifted the second rifle. But when she pressed it against her shoulder, something inside her steadied. She remembered the fire in her chest when she had struck Jack down. She remembered the way her voice had not broken when she told him he would never own her again. Outside, the riders spread into a line as they neared, dust billowing around them. A flag of smoke-gray cloth whipped in the wind above their lead rider. Emily's stomach churned. "Who are they?" she asked. "Jack's men," Dawson said grimly. "The kind he bought with coin and whiskey. The kind that don't ask questions as long as the pay's good." The riders slowed as they reached the fence line, their horses snorting hooves tearing up the earth. The leader dismounted, a tall man with a scar across his jaw. His eyes scanned the ranch yard, falling on the broken window, the bullet-scarred walls. His voice carried loud and steady. "Malone," he called. "You in there? We saw the smoke." Figured you'd be waiting with our share. Emily's throat tightened. Jack's body still lay inside the ranch house, blood pooling dark across the wooden floor. Dawson's eyes flicked toward it, then back to her. Don't let them see him, he said quietly. Not yet. If they know he's gone, they'll burn this place to the ground. Emily's heart hammered. Then what do we do? Dawson's voice stayed even though his hand trembled against the rifle. We bluff. We buy time. And if that fails, his eyes hardened, like steel drawn from the fire, we fight. Emily swallowed hard, gripping the rifle tighter. She had never thought of herself as a fighter. She had been a survivor, a runner, a woman hiding in shadows. But standing here beside a man bleeding yet unbroken, she felt something new rising inside her. The leader called out again, impatience creeping into his voice. Jack, if you're drunk in there, you best come out before we come in for you. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. The decision hung heavy in the air. They could lie stall for time, maybe send the men chasing a ghost, or they could brace for the storm and let the prairie decide who walked away. Dawson leaned close to her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Whatever happens, you're not his prisoner anymore. Not Jack's. Not theirs. You understand? She nodded, tears burning her eyes but not falling. Her voice came out steady, clear. I understand. The riders outside shifted restless, their leader's hand on his revolver. Dawson straightened, wincing as the wound in his side pulled at him. But he raised the rifle and rested it in the crook of the broken window. Then let's see what kind of devils they are without their master. Emily lifted her rifle too, the barrel steady despite the shaking in her arms. The ranch house, battered and blood-stained, stood like a fortress against the dawn. And as the first rider began to dismount, the standoff of a lifetime began to take shape in the dust and silence of the prairie. The ranch yard held its breath. 12 riders sat uneasy in their saddles at the fence line, dust swirling around them. The leader, the scar-jawed man, stood with one hand resting on his revolver, his eyes locked on the dark doorway of the house. The silence stretched long enough that even the horses grew restless, stamping and snorting against the weight of it. Inside, Emily crouched near the window, her rifle braced against the sill. Beside her, Dawson stood with his shoulders squared, though his shirt was soaked dark with blood. He looked like a man carved out of the land itself, weathered, scarred, but still unbroken. The leader raised his voice again. Malone, you've got a fine way of greeting your own boys. We rode hard all night, and you've got the coin we came for. Emily's chest tightened. The body of Jack Malone lay just out of sight on the floorboards behind them. The coppery smell of blood still hung heavy in the air. Dawson's jaw flexed, his eyes, never leaving the riders outside. He's not here, Dawson called, his voice steady. And he won't be. The scar-jawed man narrowed his eyes. Who the hell are you? Name's Dawson. This is my land. Your boss picked the wrong place to spill his poison. A ripple of unease passed through the riders, a shifting of saddles, a tightening of reins. But the leader only sneered. You expect me to believe Jack Malone's dead? No one takes him down. No one. Dawson lifted the rifle higher, the barrel glinting in the sun. Then ride in and see for yourself. For a moment, no one moved. The prairie stretched wide and endless, the wind whispering across the grass, carrying with it the weight of choice. Then the leader barked a sharp laugh. Kill them both, he ordered, and the yard exploded into chaos. Gunfire ripped the morning apart. Bullets smashed into the walls of the house, splinters flying. Emily flinched but held her ground, squeezing the trigger. Her shot cracked across the yard, striking one rider's arm and sending him tumbling from the saddle. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, but she steadied herself, reloaded, and fired again. Dawson's rifle thundered beside her, each shot measured, deliberate. One horse reared and screamed its rider, crashing to the ground. Another man clutched his chest and fell backward from the saddle. But the riders pressed forward, firing into the windows, shouting curses. Bullets shattered glass, tore holes through the door, punched into the table. Emily dropped low, her heart hammering, then popped up long enough to take another shot. Her bullet slammed into the dirt at a horse's hooves, sending the animal bolting sideways, scattering the line. Good, Dawson muttered through gritted teeth. Keep them moving. Don't let them settle. His face was pale sweat dripping down his temple, but his eyes blazed. Each time he pulled the trigger, another rider fell or scattered. The men tried to circle, pushing toward the barn, hoping to flank the house. Emily saw them through the side window. They're coming around, she cried. Dawson cursed under his breath. We hold them here. If they get inside, it's over. The next minutes blurred into thunder and smoke. Emily's arms ached, her ears rang her throat raw from shouting. Every shot she fired felt like the difference between life and death. She thought of Jack's words, his taunts that she would always be his. Each pull of the trigger was her answer. The riders began to break. Two fled across the prairie, spurring their horses hard. Another stumbled wounded behind the trough. The scar-jawed leader cursed, firing wildly, his face twisted with rage. And then silence fell again. The dust began to settle. Only 4 riders remained upright, their eyes darting between each other, their courage bleeding away with every heartbeat. The leader growled, spitting into the dirt. "You'll regret this, Dawson. She'll regret it most of all. Jack's name doesn't die with him. Men like us, we don't disappear." Dawson stepped into the doorway, rifle still aimed. His voice was ragged but steady as bedrock. "Then ride while you still can, because if you set foot on this land again, you won't ride back." The standoff stretched. Finally, the leader swung into his saddle, fury etched into his scarred face. He snapped the reins and the last of them rode off, leaving only churned dirt and the smell of gunpowder behind. Emily sagged against the wall, her body trembling, her rifle slipping from her hands. She covered her face with shaking palms, sobs breaking free at last. Not of fear this time, but of release. Dawson leaned against the doorway, lowering his rifle with a grunt. His knees threatened to buckle, but Emily rushed to him, slipping under his arm, steadying his weight. "You're bleeding too much," she whispered, panic in her voice. He gave her a tired half smile, the same one that had steadied her since the first moment in the clearing. "Takes more than a few bullets to send me down. But I won't lie, girl. I'll need your hands steady if I'm to last the night." She nodded fiercely, guiding him inside, past Jack's still body, past the shattered wood and broken glass. The house was battered, but it still stood, like them. Hours later, when the sun dipped low and painted the prairie in red and gold, Emily stepped outside. The land stretched wide, scarred, but beautiful. For the first time, she felt its vastness, not as a prison, but as a promise. She pressed a hand to her throat, to the raw mark the rope had left, and looked back at Dawson, resting inside his eyes, heavy but alive. Jack Malone was gone. His men scattered. The shadows of her past would never fully vanish, but they no longer ruled her. She was more than a survivor now. She was free. And as the night gathered once more, Emily Carter knew she would never again bow her head to the devil.